You're watching a Gravitas special edition, and we are focusing on the BRICS summit that will be underway tomorrow. Days after diffusing tensions over the Doklam Plateau, Prime Minister Modi will deliberate with his host China's President Xi Jinping at the summit in Xiamen. The Chinese have waved the red flag on terrorism in Pakistan, and India is yet to reveal its cards. But geopolitical shifts will raise many questions about BRICS. Well, the summit gets underway on Monday with the theme of stronger partnership for a brighter future. But the North Korean hydrogen bomb test may dilute the focus of the summit. This is what's on the agenda. It will look to strengthen its image as open to trade and committed to globalization. Expect a strong focus on trade and investment issues. There's talk of setting up a BRICS credit rating agency on the lines of Moody's and others in the West, enhancing cooperation among the members on climate change and renewable energy. The summit is also expected to take up for discussion the expansion of the group with the admission of new members. Joining me this evening, Padma Rao, Senior Foreign Editor, with me in the studio. Arun Singh, former Ambassador to the US, also with me in the studio. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. And we will have our very own Ramesh Ramachandran, International Correspondent, bringing you live reports and the latest from Xiamen in China. Good evening to all of you. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, you've been writing about what to expect and why this summit is very important. Tell us more.
Okay, I think the Chinese hosts have been talking about completing one golden decade of the BRICS cooperation process, which is dated back to 2006-2007. So I think it's a kind of a landmark in that sense that we've completed about 10 years, although this is only the 9th summit. And I think the fact that they have stuck together, despite these divergences in the nature of their economies, their foreign policies, and the different regions they inhabit, it's a very unique institution that has, served the interests of all the member states and aspires to also show a leading light to the rest of the developing world. So I think BRICS as a kind of an avant-garde for the global south, that idea, although it's still work in progress, is important to bear in mind, because remember, we have like the G77 process in the UN where there are more than 120 countries. And for most of them, BRICS is supposedly some kind of like a lighthouse, showing them the path to cooperate and also spreading public goods like BRICS Development Bank, supporting projects not just among member countries, but eventually to the rest of them. So I think this is a great hope for many of us who in the developing world who have believed in the idea of South-South cooperation, but who mostly spoke about solidarity in a political sense, but could not deliver economic benefits to our people. So I think BRICS is slowly but surely heading in that direction. That's one. The second point is I want to mention the security aspects. You spoke about how the Chinese have been objecting to India raising the Pakistan issue here in BRICS and so on. But remember, there are important security mechanisms, at least aspirationally. BRICS wants to form a joint position on countering terrorism, which is more rhetorical and unfortunately has not translated into reality because of the narrow nationalistic perceptions of, especially of China and India, while I think the rest are more or less unanimous on opposing terrorism. Just see what President Xi Jinping just said at the convention, at the opening speech a few hours ago. He said, we believe in a holistic approach to countering terrorism, and by which he means, and he says, we should look at the root causes, which is, of course, going down the line of the Pakistani position, which is that, India is oppressing people in Kashmir, and therefore there is insurgency and terrorism against India. So I think, but when it comes to Xinjiang, for example, the Chinese will not accept there is any root cause. So at the end of the day, there are a lot of these particularistic interests that are clashing and conflicting. So we need to overcome this. There is a national security advisor level dialogue. They are talking about finding a common position on global hotspots, which I'm not sure, again, all of them share. So, for example, if Venezuela is going through crisis, we are not sure what Brazil's view is and how the others can support it. So I have always believed that that BRICS should form a system where we should give each of the member countries a kind of a pilot role in their respective regions, and the rest of the members, the remaining four, should support that pilot country's position and aid in resolution of crises. That's something, again, it's work in the progress, it's in the pipelines. I hope in the future, be it North Korea or Venezuela or the Democratic Republic of Congo, BRICS should come up with a common position that will make it a weightier player in the global power politics and not just in economics.
Right. Sreeram Chaulia, how do you think BRICS as a forum compares to other similar structures, and do you believe that it has the potential to become a political force given the kind of differences that the member countries have?
Well, BRICS is incomparable because it's an intercontinental formation. It's not a regional organization like the EU or ASEAN or Mercosur. So in that sense, it's bringing together, knitting together the whole idea of the global south, the entire southern hemisphere, so to say. So in that sense, if you look at Brazil, for example, or South Africa, because they don't share any territorial boundaries with the rest of the three members and are in a different geopolitical space, it creates opportunities for, thinking through some of the more idealistic principles of shared values as developing countries, as former colonial countries, as countries that aspire to change the the polarity in the global international system itself. So in that sense, BRICS is unique. But yes, we can certainly pick up, as Padma is saying, learn from others how to manage our individual differences and how to construct a common agenda. I mean, that remains, I think, the biggest challenge always, as I was mentioning on the case of terrorism. But I would suggest that, we should also look at other issues. There has been, for a long time, the Russians have been wanting to create a BRICS energy bank or an energy union because there are countries like Brazil and Russia are energy surplus, while South Africa, India, and China are actually energy buyers in the global markets. So on the other hand, for renewables, the New Development Bank has been pushing in a big way. And I think these are the concrete areas where if we can deliver, I think all the skeptics will be, answered. What has not happened, and something that needs to happen further, is global economic governance. There's been a lot of talk about how BRICS are changing or pushing the Bretton Woods institutions and moving them in a more equitable direction, increasing their voting shares and their percentages in all these bodies. But at the same time, we know that these are primarily still Western controlled. Therefore, ultimately, BRICS and other such formations, the outreach is important, what Ambassador mentioned, because if we can bring in 4 or 5 other countries, I know this is a consensus-driven process, it's going to take a while, but eventually it has to be BRICS Plus. So I am not so suspicious of the Chinese move on this aspect that somehow BRICS Plus is going to benefit the Chinese, because if they bring in, even look at the countries they've invited for this summit, Egypt, it's a very solid, it's always been supportive of India's position on a number of issues, and so on. So I'm trying to say that we need to bring in more energy and more dynamism from different continents to make this a viable international, truly global project. Bring in 1 or 2 from each of the continents, and that's going to make a substantial difference to our agenda and to our, collective strength. Because ultimately, multipolarity will come only by joining hands. When weaker and smaller countries come together, that's only we can really challenge the more established ones.